Today on Gigi Says What Now, we are talking about Andy. No, not Andy Dufresne, silly. He's a fictional character written by Stephen King. Janice is going to drive me insane. Like, literally insane. Okay, so Andy Dufresne is a fictional character written by Stephen King, and he is featured in a story called Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. But the movie Shawshank Redemption is even better. In my opinion, it is the best Stephen King film adaptation ever produced. It is fantastic, and I've seen it a million times. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Go. Just turn off this video and go watch it. Once upon a time, there was a lovely little devout Catholic couple that immigrated to the United States from the Carpathian Mountains and ended up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. On August 6, 1928, they welcomed their third child into the world. They named him Andrew Warhol. So young Andy would suffer from a neurological condition that I can't pronounce to save my life, so I'm not even going to try. But this condition caused him to have very splotchy skin, almost like rosacea. He also suffered from like twitches and stuff. Now, historians and doctors would go on to say, after his passing, that he probably would have been diagnosed on the spectrum. Of course, with autism spectrum disorders, we really didn't start studying them and diving into them until like the 1940s. So he kind of wouldn't have been diagnosed very young. And even now, still with as much as we know, it's still pretty difficult to get an accurate diagnosis for autism spectrum disorder. But he probably did, as well as many professionals say he was dyslexic, and they can tell that from his writings and whatnot. So, he had a plethora of things going on that kind of made him, stand out. It was very hard for him to make friends because he was kind of labeled the weird kid, and they would call him names. And he was really just kind of bullied. They called him things like Spot and Red Nose, and it was, very difficult for him to make friends. One of the ways that he would try to make friends is he would invite people over and offer to draw their portrait. And that really kind of helped him make that personal one-on-one connection with other people and with his peers, which is so essential and something that everybody needs, but can be difficult to achieve for even neurodivergent people. It can be very difficult to achieve. So that was pretty awesome that he did that. When Andy was very young, his mother would gift him his very first camera. He was 8 years old when he was gifted this camera, and it became a prized possession for him. Other things he did as a child is he would turn to comics and magazines and paper dolls. Very artistic things, and things that you definitely see throughout his life and throughout the work of his life. And growing up in a very devout Catholic household meant that he went to church. He went to a lot of church. If you've never been to a devout Catholic church or a Roman Catholic church, there is a lot of iconography, or if you've never studied art history goes into it a lot too. There's a lot of iconography, and there's the artistry is just absolutely gorgeous. It's larger than life. It's very vivid in colors and has a gothic feel to it. And so he was exposed to the artistry and the aesthetics, very heavily at a very influential time in his life. And that's something else that you can really see throughout his work. When you really look at it, you can see that even though it's not that kind of religious iconography. So Andy took some courses, some free courses at Carnegie Institute of Technology, and he would end up actually going to college at Carnegie. So after college, Andy then moved to New York. And, I mean, slay. When he moved to New York, he dropped the A from his last name, making him Andrew Warhol, or what we call him today, Andy Warhol. You know, I mean, I think that was something that was actually kind of popular at that time, because when my grandparents immigrated to the United States, and their native tongue was French. My last name is Gravel, Gravelle. And when they moved to the United States, they dropped that last LE off of the last name to make it Gravel, which of course spells gravel, but they didn't know that, to sound more Americanized and help them fit in. And that was actually kind of around the same time. So I think it's something that's not a unique story. I think a lot of us, children and grandchildren to immigrants, have seen that kind of pigeoning with their names. In 1949, he would write a article called "What is Success? A Job in New York." Now that was featured in Glamour magazine. And he would go on to have a career in advertising, creating ads for places such as Tiffany's, Columbia Music, and Vogue. Now, during this time, he refined that dotted line ink drawings. You know what I mean? It's very comical-esque, or not comical, but from comics. You know, we see it a lot in comics, and he definitely kind of brought that to the forefront and brought that into advertising. In 1952, his mom came to stay with him in New York, and in 1957, he would self-publish a coloring book of her drawings of little holy cats, cute little cats. And he would actually throw coloring parties at a place called Serendipity, a little ice cream parlor, and they would all get together and color. And that just sounds so wicked fun to me. I want to have a coloring book party. Will y'all come have ice cream with me and color cute little pictures? Please. How fun. In 1956, he did a solo exhibition of some sketches of his that depicted mainly men. And this is where the conversation over Andrew's sexual identity came into play. He had already kind of created a name for himself. He'd already become kind of popularized. And now people were, during a time where it was illegal to be gay, were saying, "Are you gay?" Now, Andy would answer these questions saying that he was asexual, whether that was because he needed to be closeted because of the law, whether he needed to be closeted because the opportunities that he had created for himself and the career he had created for himself was in jeopardy, or whether it was because he was actually asexual, is really none of our business. That's what he said. He identified as, and so we're going to respect that during this point, or this period in his life, Andrew was asexual. Now, Andy would have same-sex as well as possibly polyamorous relationships. Now, in the 1960s is when his pop art would really pop off. Okay, so you all have seen, I'm sure, the pictures of the soup cans or the Brillo pad boxes or bananas, things like that, and these really bright, vivid, vibrant, in-your-face colors, primary colors, that have become incredibly popularized. And I think, there are apps, most apps, where you can find filters of that Campbell's soup can. On April 9th, 1936, in New Jersey, a bartender and a dental assistant gave birth to one of two children they named Valerie Solanas. Valerie would grow up to be the author of a manifesto called the Scum Manifesto. Has a 3.7 on Goodreads, by the way. And a play called Up My Ass. Kind of makes me think of that. Is it Metallica? The metal up here with the knife coming out of the toilet. Valerie was an activist and an extreme feminist and described herself as subversive. Anyway, in her 30s, she had a friend of a friend who knew Andy Warhol, and through them, they linked up. They hooked up. They talked. They were not like together. They met. And he thought the title, Up Your Ass, of her play was really funny. So he gave her a chance. So she would spend 3-ish years kind of circling his orbit and being a part of his group of friends, his group of employees, his group of people, whom all said that he was incredibly loyal to them and was a very good friend. But she was, like I said, she was an extremist, and she was very in your face, very intense kind of energy, and eventually it just got to be a little too much, and she was kind of pushed out of the circle. Andy did never produce her play, Up Your Ass, and she got pretty pissed off, saying that he owed her money because he stole her manuscript, and she would almost stalk him. She was calling him constantly, and Andy actually recorded some of those phone calls, and some of the stuff she would say in these phone calls, he would repeat verbatim in some of his movies and didn't credit her for those lines. Of course, he did take them from personal conversations as well, so that's a little kind of sus, but I don't think it warrants what happens next. Okay, so Andy and his moved his studio, not because it had nothing to do with Valerie. He just moved his studio because it was time to move his studio. So she goes up to his new studio, where she would pull out a pew-pew and fire 5 shots into Andy Warhol's body. She also shot one of his production assistants and was about to shoot somebody else when the elevator door went ding, and she stepped inside, saving the person's life. Now, it would take Andy's surgeons, 5 of them in total, it would take them 5 hours to try to put back together his insides. Most of them did not have any hope that he would survive, but Andy beat the odds, and he did survive the assassination attempt on his life. Now, Valerie would say in later interviews that she regretted it. She regretted that she had not taken target practice earlier. She called them stupid stars and referred to Andy Warhol as a vulture and a thief. She would eventually die in a hotel in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. So Andy went through a very long recovery process from the attempt on his life that would leave him needing to wear compression around his middle for the rest of his life. So he chose to wear, or he needed to wear, corsets. During this time, so he became a regular at Studio 54 and completely immersed himself in the culture that lived within the studio. If you do not know about Studio 54, I encourage you to look it up. Maybe I'll make an episode on Studio 54 one day. Anyway, during this time, he also did a series that he called Landscapes. Now, Landscapes were very reminiscent of the sketches he did early on in his career. In addition to that, he was also doing his famous portraits. I'm sure you've seen them. Again, even today, every single photo app or video app or editing app has a filter. What he would do is he would take Polaroids of people, and he would blow up the Polaroid and then put layer upon layer upon layer of color on top. It's kind of where you see that the colorful images and the iconography, just like in his pop art, kind of come into his portraits. Now, people would pay up to $50,000 to have an Andy Warhol painted portrait. Now, so in 1975, he would do a series called Ladies and Gentlemen. The intention of this series was to bring attention to and awareness to and celebrate the trans community and trans people. Now, he started off hiring one of his friends and assistants named Bob put Bob in a wig and took some Polaroids of him. But you know what? Bob didn't look like a trans woman. He just looked like a dude in a wig. So he sent his people down to the streets to hire trans people to come sit and model for him. He hired a total of 13 people, paying each of them $50 to $100 each to take their Polaroid. And one of those, so on the side of his Polaroids, he would write the name of the model. And so 12 of those 13 people were identified. Now, one of them was Marsha P. Johnson. If you don't know who Marsha P. Johnson is, stay tuned. So Marsha P. Johnson, in my world, is an icon, and in your world, too. She, so this is during a period of time where, obviously, as I've said before, being gay was illegal. What people wore was also legislated. It was, people had to wear a certain number of articles of clothing that aligned with the biological sex that they were assigned at birth, that was on their birth certificate, and that was regulated by law. Now, as such, there were, just like during the time of Prohibition, where there were underground places, underground bars where people could go to drink, during this time there were underground places where people, members of the LGBTQIA plus community, could go, that were safe places, and they could, relax and unwind and have fun with their friends the way we all want to do. And so Marsha, Miss Johnson, goes down to a bar called the Stonewall one night just to relax and have a good time with her friends. No threat to anybody. And on that particular night, the bar was raided. And the police were arresting people in a very brutal and aggressive and violent nature. And Marsha P. Johnson's flight or fight kicked in, and it was fight. Now, her one little action caused and sparked, her one little reaction caused and sparked a full-blown riot that is now known today as the Stonewall Riots. In the period that would come, in a very short period of time that would come after that, a march, a protest was organized to protest against police brutality, to protest against laws that legislate how we can dress and who we can love, laws and to advocate for laws that would protect people from violent hate and from, obviously, the police brutality. Now, this protest and march still continues on today, and we call it Gay Pride Parade. Now, why we do approach it in a very jubilous and festive manner, and it does feel like a parade, make no mistake, it is absolutely 100% a protest and a fight for equality for all people of the LGBTQIA plus community. Marsha P. Johnson would go on to be an activist for the remainder of her life. Her body would be found floating in a river not long after a gay pride march or gay pride parade, however you want to call it, and she had been bludgeoned in the back of the head. The police originally ruled her death as suicide or self-inflicted. Please don't ban me. That's what they ruled it. Now, how somebody bludgeons themselves in the back of the head is beyond me. There was major talks and whatnot, and the coroner was forced to change his ruling from self-inflicted to possible homicide. Possible homicide. Yeah. Anyway, she was one of the 13 that sat for Andy Warhol, and she was certainly not paid more than $100. She would say, and I'm not quoting verbatim, I'm pulling from memory, she would say something along the lines of, it was during a period of time where she was struggling to pay her rent, and there were portraits of her in studios that were being sold for thousands and thousands of dollars. And indeed, though Andy spent less than $1,300 on his models, ladies and gentlemen, netted around the $1 million mark. Which brings into question, here he is, trying to uplift and bring awareness to and celebrate the trans community while simultaneously exploiting them. Obviously, there wasn't an open discourse, and there wasn't social media. So there were talks of this among certain communities, and how, that was really messed up of Andy to do. Now, being a business person and putting brand first, and he really did consider business to be an art, probably more so than anything that he had ever created. In the business world, he was celebrated. That's celebrated. That kind of exploitation still today is celebrated because it's profitable. In 1987, Andy would go in to have surgery on his gallbladder as a direct result of the wounds that he had sustained in his assassination attempt. He would not recover from the surgery and would succumb. Andy Warhol, his net worth was worth approximately $220 million when he passed away. So thank you for joining me today on Gigi Says What Now. I certainly hope you will hit that subscribe button, because I will be coming back to you with more random historical events, people, mythology, and folklore in the future, and we can talk trash about that too. Remember, you are valid, you are worthy, and you're alive.